52 of them that our teacher and founder, Swami Kriyananda, a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, wrote for us. And last weekend was the Hindu celebration of Guru Purnima, which is the recognition in gratitude and devotion of the great teachers of humanity. And then this week, the reading goes on basically in the same vein. And then last night, we had a beautiful kirtan in celebrating, where are you, Babaji? The life and living presence of an incomparable avatar, Babaji. We don't even know when he was born, and so our teacher, Swami Kriyananda, made up the date July 25th as a possible date long ago in 1920 when Babaji appeared to him, came to Yogananda at his home in Calcutta and blessed him in sending him to the West for his life's work. So there we have it. It seems to be in the stars, in the air. I constantly hear about how artificial intelligence can do all these wonderful things, and including, I was tempted to think, okay, well, give me a sermon on the need and the role of the guru, but somehow I just couldn't make myself do that. So I said I was going to give AI a test. I did this instead. I said, give me a joke about the guru. The first joke was even cheesier than the one I'm going to tell you, but the second one it gave me went something like this. Why does the guru not want to play hide and seek? Because good disciples are hard to find. So much for AI as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, so it is an important topic, but well, not like so many other topics, but very particular to itself, is that it's very personal. You know, the very first sentence of Yogananda's famous, millions have read his life story, Autobiography of a Yogi, but the very first sentence in that book goes something like this: the characteristic features of Indian culture are the search for eternal verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. And then if you go to the Bible, to the Old Testament, chapter 1 of Genesis is, this big, God created the world in 7 days and all that. And then the second chapter descends immediately to personal Adam and Eve. And this is how life is. We ask the big questions. We have a relationship to the big world in which we find ourselves. But the real question is about me. What is my relationship to the circumstances in which I find myself? Now, Krishna and Christ, Jesus Christ and Lord Krishna, and then, in a way, by extension, Jesus was a Jew, right? And Buddha was a Hindu. And so by extension, when you think of Buddhism as an extension, not of Hinduism as in the way that we kind of know it culturally and so forth, but of the core precepts of India, which are known as Sanatana Dharma, the eternal Dharma, the eternal way, the eternal reality, etc. Those three great teachers have impacted world history like no other. Okay, and if Babaji hadn't met with Babaji in human form, hadn't met with Jesus Christ, not in human form, and came up with the plan for the evolution of spirituality in a new age in which we find ourselves, by sending to the West someone to resurrect the inner practice of religion, the inner path of spirituality, where would we be? We wouldn't even be here if it weren't for a lineage of people. There's a chapter in the autobiography, again, I think the opening words of the chapter, and now I can't remember what the chapter was about, but in the opening words, Sri Yukteswar, who was Yogananda's guru, this fellow, scolds Yogananda, in effect, in the tone in his voice. He says, why are you so adverse to, well, the words on the chapter were organizational details. And again, I'm not going to quote it, but Yogananda says, well, it's a snake pit, you know what I mean? And we all know that, right? I mean, look what human beings have done to religion. They basically make a mess of it, right? I mean, and the whole thing is a mess. Yogananda came to America. I'm surprised they didn't string him up, but he said, Jesus was crucified once, but his teachings have been crucified ever since. And thus it is. That's one reason why a renewal of the essential precepts and the essential vibration of the soul needs to be channeled, transmitted from every age. In fact, that's what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, I incarnate. When vice predominates and virtue declines, I incarnate into every age. And this is the other mess of pottage that people make. The personal pronoun I, Jesus saying, I am the way, the light, and the truth, and no man comes to the Father but by me. What I is he talking about? Krishna says more or less exactly the same kinds of things in the Bhagavad Gita. And so what we find, and here I'll focus more on just Krishna and Christ. You know, Yogananda was asked, well, why do you focus on these two lineages? You know, the question didn't say, why not Buddhism and why not Islam and so on and so forth. But he said only simply, he would not really answer the question, though I have my own answer. But he said, it was Babaji's wish that I focus. My personal opinion, you can take it or leave it, is that between Krishna and Jesus Christ, Krishna representing also Hinduism at large, the teachings of India at large, both of those lineages say absolutely with clarity the role and the need for the divine being of a guru to free and awaken the soul to its ultimate destiny. No other religion or great spiritual teacher puts it as clearly, okay? Now, it's very much at odds with the consciousness, certainly of our nation, of the West generally, and of the evolution of that consciousness throughout the world. It's very much at odds because we represent, just sticking with America for the moment, we represent a wave of individual liberties and freedom, okay? Don't tread on me. Remember that flag in the Revolution on the Navy, the colonial Navy? Don't tread on me. And we're very, you know, whatever the word is, we're very sensitive to people treading on me. And that's good, right, and just. But at the same time, there's something else happening beneath it all. And it's exactly right. Sri Yukteswar said in the evolution of consciousness as that we're entering into, that people would discover self-respect. In the earlier times, medieval ages, if you will, you didn't even have a last name. You were born next to a river, or you were born into a family of blacksmiths, or, you know, self-respect did not exist. You were a serf, a peon, a slave. You owed your allegiance to whatever, whoever, okay? That is no longer acceptable. But what is the since all things in duality must perchance balance, what is the necessary balance to that? It's all about me consciousness, okay? Which is needful. Well, underneath what's happening is the realization brought to us to some degree, to a very large and powerful degree, by science itself. We are one. We are interdependent, with nature at least, if nothing else. But that connection, there's a realization among human beings, which is not really new, but you can't have freedom without responsibility, although you wouldn't know it from reading the newspaper. But nonetheless, there is that balance. So there is also, therefore, the seeds for a longer-term recognition that there are those who channel the precepts and the living example of truth as well. This teaching of the Guru is also, when you think of, Hindus and Krishna, and you think of Christians and Jesus Christ, it's a wide spectrum of relationship. I don't even know, because I haven't really been noodling around Christian circles since I came on this path in my 20s, but I don't know how many Christians describe themselves as disciples of Christ. They should be, right? It makes sense. But in other words, in the spectrum of the practice and consciousness and realization of what their faith is all about, I don't really know how many, and you can imagine what I suspect, but I won't say it, how many people really have a deep and meaningful relationship with their Guru. Now, Christianity says there's only one, okay. And in India, they say that the transmission happens in every age, but still, the basic principle is the same, okay? Jesus, the Son of God, was he the only Son of God? Well, I'm not going to go down that path. You can come to one of my courses or read my book. That's obviously not the case, but nonetheless, I don't think you'd be here if you thought it was. But where was I? I have to pick up my thread somewhere, somehow. But nonetheless, there's a spectrum of understanding and personal devotion and relationship to the Guru in whatever faith tradition people exist. St. Francis, who was truly one of the great reformers of Christianity, the reform didn't last long, but he tried. It was good. What he did was good. And then you have, the Adi Shankaracharya, Swami Shankara, who was the great reformer of Hinduism in the 10th century. And I think St. Francis was maybe the 13th century, 1200s. And St. Francis had tens of thousands of disciples. And in my lifetime, some of your lifetime, and somebody that was very meaningful to me before I came on this path, and still is, was a stigmatist, a humble priest in southern Italy, Padre Pio, who had the stigmata. He was the first official priest to get it. St. Francis was the first saint to receive the wounds of Christ on his body. So what I'm sort of pointing at here is that the relationship of the soul, of any individual, to the Guru, which is a word somewhat new to us, but that's the right word, varies by individual greatly. It's not unlike, I've often made this analogy, it's not unlike marriage. First off, within any given marriage, you have, a spectrum of the way the relationship is expressed. I'm not going to describe it all to you. If you don't know, talk to Padma. And then if you take marriage as as a phenomenon of human existence, you see a very wide range of relationships, just even at a distance in general. And so it is with the spiritual path. Where I'm going with this is simple. When we try to tune in to the Guru, to a saint, we see the lives of the saints. And for us here at Ananda, our founder, Swami Kriyananda, he lived with Yogananda in the last years of Yogananda's life. He taught many of us personally, but through his books, everyone, he shared his life. His life was an open book. He lived a life of transparency in the effort to just dissolve his sense of separateness, his ego. He said, my goal is to be a good disciple, to be a disciple. And yet, somebody like him who was a great individual soul, an inspired teacher, had a great work to do, his guru said, in his own right, had people, and in his life and years in India, the word guru was used in that relationship. And there are those at Ananda who would privately say the same thing. He would not allow us to use that term because Yogananda wanted us to understand in this age that unlike in India today and unlike everywhere where the word is used, the word is more than just a teacher, more than a computer guru, a financial guru, or even an inspired spiritual teacher, which is more or less how it is used in India. Yogananda Ji wanted us to use the term in the same way that many, if not most Hindus, revere Krishna, and in the same way that Christians look to Jesus Christ. Because the true guru is one whose power, whose grace, whose transmission knows no bounds. Because I and my Father are one. Whereas many great saints have different levels of power. I've been rereading some of the books on Padre Pio, with whom I've always felt a deep connection. There's a rumor going around the internet that, because I was so puzzled that Yogananda, in his trip to Europe on his way back to India in 1935, he visited Therese Neumann, also a stigmatist woman saint in Bavaria, Germany. But it always puzzled me, how could he have missed Padre Pio? I mean, if you know his life, and I don't have time to get into his life per se, but it's really quite remarkable. And, well, there's a rumor going around the internet that, in fact, Yogananda did visit Padre Pio in southern Italy. And there's other things that kind of support that. But Padre Pio was under arrest, if you will, by the Catholic Church, which they do to all their saints. It's really embarrassing when somebody starts levitating and making miracles, and you think, oh my God, it's the same thing with Jesus, right? They crucified him. And so as long as they're alive doing this, they're under suspicion. So Padre Pio was prohibited from saying the Mass in public. I mean, he would lift the host and he would just go into ecstasy. I mean, his Mass would take 3 hours or instead of 20 minutes. And so they locked him up. So Yogananda visited him, it is said, but he would not mention it publicly because there was so much suspicion from the Vatican, certain people in the Vatican and so on, about whether Padre Pio was a fraud or not. Well, he was definitely no fraud if you take the time to investigate it yourself. There was a sentence in the most recent book of Padre Pio that I read that our spiritual director, Kriyananda's successor, Nayaswamis Jyotish, and his wife write a weekly blog. They take turns, and one of his, he mentioned the book, dadgummit, I can't think of the name of it, suddenly, the title of the book. Do you remember?
Padre Pio and I.
Thank you, Padre Pio and I. And it's an odd book, but it's really beautiful. I speed read it, and Lajana wants to borrow my copy, but I won't give it to her because I want to read it again. But there's a sentence in there where this was about a boy who became a man. That's what happens, And he was one of Padre Pio's spiritual sons, or children, or whatever they called them. He was standing there in a crowd. He was raised in the town, little town, way at the bottom of Italy. I mean, it's, and he was just standing there, and Padre Pio picked him out of the crowd and said, Adolfo? Was that his name, Adolfo? Whatever it was, Adolfo, thank you. Adolfo, come here. And he said, me? And Padre Pio was a real character. This is the part that I love. He said, well, my name isn't Adolfo. So he became one of his spiritual sons. And one of the things in the early chapter that really stuck with me is that Padre Pio prayed to Christ. He said, if it be your wish, if it be okay with you, if I can be an actor and a spectator of the things you do through me that are not mine. And, just have to trust me for now, unless you want to read his books. The things Padre Pio did are just really over the top. And so what I'm saying here is that our relationship to God through the great ones. Yogananda said we read spiritual books, maybe we go to spiritual classes, maybe we find, in my sort of Christianity hat, when I talk to people in my family, they say, oh, I go to such and such church because so-and-so is a great speaker. Oh, okay, great speaker. I mean, I used to enjoy, what was that guy's name? I can't think of names anymore. Back in the hippie days when the ferment, what's this? Alan Watts, and all these other, Wayne Dyer, all these people. This is what happens, you see. We tune into people who share with us inspiration. I know why, though I was born in 1950, right? Yeah, 50. And Yogananda died in 1950. I learned long ago why I didn't meet him. I wasn't ready. You see what I mean? And so we receive what we need for inspiration. And we should always be grateful for those who have inspired us, even if we sort of move on, okay? Even if, unless they truly are an avatar, a Christ, a Krishna, they're probably not perfect, okay? Padre Pio, as I said, was a real character, and he could knock you in the head, and he did sometimes. He kept praying, forgive me, but in his confessions, thousands would come to him for confession. This fellow, Adolfo, he was so nervous, he was still pretty young, he was so nervous going to his first confession, he couldn't remember his sins, right? How many of us Catholics went to our first confession, had to make up some sins, right? Let's see, I slugged my brother, whatever. And then, you know what Padre Pio did? He said, it's okay. And then he listed off Adolfo's sins. And then he asked him, when did you take your last confession? He couldn't remember. And then he told him the name of the priest and where and the church where he went. I mean, this guy was really over the top, okay? And who cares? Do I really care whether Padre Pio was an avatar? I mean, who am I to tell who's an avatar? I wouldn't know one if they ran me over with a truck. We need to follow our faith and our inspiration and to be open to the simple fact that whether it's art or science or anything, homemaking, that there are people who are masters of their art. There are people who have things to share with us. Your very neighbors have things to share with us. When we can see in one another the goodness, the blessedness of other people, then eventually we will say, as Peter did, "Thou art the living Christ, the Son of the living God." When everybody else looked down and shuffled their feet, and maybe you're in Jeremiah, or, they didn't know what to say. Only Peter, Barjuna, looked Jesus in the eyes and said what nobody else could say. And he said it, with intuition. Our ability, thousands went to Yogananda. Yogananda's lectures were attended by, sometimes he had to give the same lecture a second time that night, like at Carnegie Hall. Thousands would come. One time, he had 5,000 people in a hall, and somebody congratulated him, one of his friends or whatever. And he said, well, that's fine, but maybe 2 or 3 will take up this path, you see. Out of 1,000, Krishna says, 1 seeks me. And out of those who seek me, 1 perhaps knows me in my true universal, cosmic sense. That's not to discourage people. It's to encourage us to follow our bliss, as the bumper sticker says, but to be grateful for the inspiration that we've received and for those who have, and to recognize that. When we express devotion to the masters, it's not a personality, idolatry is the bane of religion as it is. I mean, never mind materialism, but mistaking the form. Jesus would use the phrase Son of Man and then sometimes Son of God. By Son of Man, he meant his body, his personality, his ego. Son of God, he meant the overarching I. The Son of God is that innate intelligence that exists in every atom of creation. It's so remarkable to me that quantum physics and that whole world is pushing us towards the recognition that reality is completely different than what we imagine. It's a small nudge compared to cosmic consciousness, but I'm all for it. It's in the right direction in any case. And so when we think about Guru, I think of course I think of it every day, of Swami Kriyananda's life and his life with Yoganandaji, his guru, my guru, or many of us. But it's different for everybody, all right? That's what I'm trying really to say. Don't take your values or your behavior from where other people are. It's beautiful to see the lives of saints. It's beautiful to read a story like Adolfo's story. Great inspiration. She's not here. Jamuna, in a couple of weeks, is going to do 2 Friday nights sharing the lives of the saints. Anybody remember who they are? Who is it? Well, anyway, you really should go. And I encourage you all. I've gotten great inspiration from the life of St. Augustine, one of the first desert fathers, from Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, of course St. Francis, and so on, who Yogananda called his patron saint. But as we work our way up the ladder, so to speak, towards liberation, cosmic consciousness, we can distill the essence of the vibration of that awakening from all and many sources. Now, when you do feel drawn to one who seems to you to have achieved that oneness, and there is said in the teaching of India that there exists from eternity that soul who will be your savior, will be the one who will lead you from darkness to light. But when the disciple is ready, the guru appears. I went off to India overland from Europe long ago, and I came back empty-handed, like most everybody else, because it's a matter of the heart. I didn't have to go all that way until Padma handed me the autobiography of a yogi. It was right there. Like Dorothy and Toto, there's no place like home, if you know the Wizard of Oz movie. And so you don't need to be concerned about that. When Vihini now is training in the Kriya preparation, Padma and I did that for many decades, we would assure people, just take your next step, okay? You can never go wrong if you're sincere, if your heart is guiding you. When I stepped up to the altar for Kriya initiation with Swami Kriyananda at his home long ago and saw the pictures of the masters, my Catholic altar boy self said, "Are you nuts? You're going to go to hell." You just have to follow your heart. But the teaching of the presence, the living presence of the Guru, spend 1 week, meditate on, talk to internally any of the great saviors of humanity. Choose one. 1 week. Have that inner dialogue, and you will know what we're talking about. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. because such a one has transcended time and space, is a living presence. So the importance of the Guru, we represent the discipleship lineage, a discipleship lineage. This is who we are, and yet the teachings are, eternal verities are for all, okay? Nobody has to do anything. You just take one step after the other, develop whatever relationship is meaningful and authentic to you. You don't need to worry about what it looks like for other people. It's about self-realization. The outer guru, the first coming of the Christ in human form, exists to awaken the inner guru, the living Christ. Yogananda called his life and his teachings the second coming of Christ. And he described or explained that what he meant by that was that the second coming is the birth in the humble manger of the heart of that inner guru, that inner guide. This is the path.